does.
Well, I mean, you're talking about the drop back quarterback versus a guy that likes to run a lot.
And if you want to talk about drop back, look at Goff did 68 pass attempts last week. So make what you want about those 500 yards, but it doesn't mean much when you're throwing that often.
Well, we welcome Anthony Wood to the program. And Anthony, first of all, I have company. His name is Addeo, Weiss, a guy you should be getting awfully familiar with. And he was talking about Jared Goff, right? So
Correct.
why don't you go ahead and talk to Anthony about your thoughts, and then we'll go into some of Anthony's information. How's that sound, Anthony? Can you hear me, Anthony? Anthony. Well, hopefully we have Anthony. But if we don't, we'll get Anthony. But anyways, let's talk about Goff a little bit. Elaborate on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, a tough loss, 55-40 loss to Tampa Bay last week. And, you have to throw for 500 yards if your run game's not really doing much. And
Good evening, Anthony.
Let's give it a try now, see if the one does.
There you go. Can you hear me? But this is not a Verizon commercial, right?
No.
All right, well, Lewis has a couple of questions about Jared Goff before we get to your information. Go ahead, fire away.
Hey, Anthony, how's it going?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Good. So I was just looking at the numbers from last week's loss to the Buccaneers, who are now 2-2. The Rams, I believe, taking that, tough 15-point loss. But, Goff 68 pass attempts in that game. Are you a big fan of quarterbacks throwing more than, say, 35, 40 times a game? Because you can say what you want about 500 passing yards, but when you're doing that across nearly 70 pass attempts, which I believe a guy like George Blanda did a couple of times back in the day when he was a kicker and a quarterback for the Raiders back in the 70s, playing until he was in his mid-40s. I don't really think you're going to win that many games. I mean, what are your thoughts on a quarterback? Look at Goff's performance, 68 pass attempts. And
it's really not for me, I'm going to be perfectly honest. There needs to be a balance. It needs to be complementary football. That's the phrase I hear a lot of NFL coaches saying. There needs to be a balance between running and passing the ball, and there needs to be some now play action thrown in as well. So a bit of a question mark as to what you're going to do. Passing it, or trying at least at 68 times, yes, you're going to rack up fantastic numbers in terms of passing yards.
And it's kind of funny what you're saying. I mean, that makes me think, defenses need to be surprised. They don't know what play you're going to call. I mean, you could see a running back lined up in the backfield, but you could still call screen pass or, go a myriad of other ways. Go up the middle with your receiver, the way Brady likes to dink and doink with, say, Edelman. But, we saw the Tampa Bay defense, I think Ndamukong Suh, pick six on one of Goff's 3 interceptions last week. So, they were kind of expecting what was coming, considering that run game wasn't really a big factor in last week's game.
I think the most...
And that's the problem I've got with it. It's just far too predictable. They know what they're going to call, even if they're throwing the occasional run. It's just too predictable. We know where they're going. We know they're going to try and pass the ball. We know that's their strength. Don't get me wrong. And that's going into it. That's all given. But at the same time, there needs to be some sort of unpredictability about the situation. And Sean McVay's been avoiding so.
I mean, we can criticize
offensive guru sort of mentality, but at the same time, this was disappointing.
Absolutely.
Well, I think the most comical thing that I saw last weekend was just watching Ndamukong Suh run the ball back, to be honest with you, for the touchdown.
Would have been nice had he done that in Miami. But
well, it would have been nice if we saw more of it in Detroit, too. So
yeah.
We have
reminds me a little bit of the fridge, William Perry.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Yes.
Well, I guess you would remember the fridge back in the UK, wouldn't you?
Oh, certainly. The 85 Bears are one of the first teams I really got to know well. They're well known in the UK, and I could talk about them for hours.
Well, we don't have hours, but maybe I'll put you on the spot for a specialty show and give you 45 minutes. Were you alive when the refrigerator was playing?
I was not. No, I wasn't born until mid-90s, so I was past that. But when I first got into football, the 85 Bears are legendary, so I went straight to it.
That's my point, but that's okay. That's why I love having you young guys around. So, all right, with that said, okay, why don't we lead off with Stefon Diggs? Go ahead.
Yes, it's a strange situation that's going up there in Minnesota at the moment. So Stefon Diggs, so this is according to Chad Graff, he says Stefon Diggs, he did train today, he didn't yesterday, he was back today. He has said, there's truth to all rumours, I won't be speaking on that, and that's literally as far as he's gotten into the, is he or is he not going to be traded? The Vikings have said they will not trade him, they have no intention of doing so, teams have inquired as far as I'm aware. Purdy and Rappaport, his frustration is very palpable at this point in time. It wasn't an injury reason he didn't practice yesterday. And the teammates are curious as to what exactly is going on. And And this is the situation. It's a very strange one because he's been keeping so quiet. Because he's unlike, let's say, an Antonio Brown situation. I know that's a very poor comparison, but it's a very, very different situation in that he's still quiet. He's still working. I still expect him to play this weekend, despite the fact they've been keeping very quiet about whether he will or won't against the Giants. But he has said today, I mean, everybody has a role. I've been here for a while. I just don't feel I have a role, but I also feel that given the situation and what's going on, I'm trying to do the best of my ability at the job. At the end of the day, all I can say is if I'm doing my job and it's what I'm asked, whether it's enough, it's kind of on them. But given opportunities, I try to make the most of the opportunities, and it's strange. He's hinting every now and then. If you go through the rest of the transcript, he's certainly hinting at frustrations with the organisation. I get the impression his frustrations are not being used enough. You can't blame him. Kirk Cousins is having an awful season, and that offense is not clicking whatsoever. But Adam Thielen, especially the last year or so, he has really become the number one guy, and even Thielen is complaining. And obviously Kirk Cousins recently came out and apologised to Thielen publicly about the situation. And Cousins alone has had 6 fumbles this year.
Most
it's
in the
appalling.
NFL.
So you can't really blame Diggs for being frustrated because he's getting on a bit. He's been in the league for quite a few years now. He wants to win, and he's not in a team that's really in a situation to be doing that right now. So you can't really blame him for being frustrated. But at the same time, he signed a new 5-year deal last summer. He's tied down to this organization, so you can understand why the Vikings are like, no, you're not going anywhere.
Well, yeah, they think he's a big part of that offense. All he needs to do is get his attitude right and quit complaining.
Certainly, but the problem is that even if he's got his attitude right and if he's in the right state of mind, Kirk Cousins clearly isn't. And that's the problem. He was only sacked twice in the first 3 weeks. Yes, they got absolutely destroyed by the Bears in terms of defense. 6 sacks last week. It was appalling. But at the same time, they can't shove blame on the offensive line necessarily because, again, those first 2 games, they were decent. It is, at this point in time, it's very much on Cousins' shoulders. Why is he not performing? Because he is not getting the best out of any of those receivers, and you can understand their frustrations.
Well, first of all, Anthony, the Bears are making everybody look bad.
That defense is,
They are.
that
I mean,
defense
think
is
of what
terrific.
they did to the Washington Redskins and the Minnesota Vikings, and they had a closely contested game against the Packers. So, I wouldn't let one team bother you, but it's the psychology of the Bears being the monsters of the Midway. So, yeah, again, these guys, we're seeing more and more barking instead of more producing, and these guys got to just focus on what they're supposed to do and not worry about the other intrinsic factors about why they're not producing. Lewis, you wanted to add something to this, right? So go ahead.
I mean, amid all these, rumors of Diggs being traded, considering, he's locked down on a 5-year deal, which he's only in the second year of, and their offense is only ranked 24th by means of Football Reference as far as league offensive rankings. They're not really a good offensive team. I mean, you said it before, Cousins has already been fumbled 6 times, he's first in the NFL. Kyle Allen, who's only started 2 games, has already fumbled 5 times in his 2 games. But what do you think that would do to the direction of the Vikings should Diggs be traded? Because don't you think they would just fall apart if they didn't really have a receiver of his caliber on the team with a team that's already, in the bottom third of, offensive teams in the NFL?
It would be difficult for them, no doubt, because especially considering that it's very much the Diggs and Thielen show on offense. So take away one of those guys and think how much of attraction the Thielen's gonna bear as a result. It would completely ruin this offense, and there would be absolutely no balance whatsoever. And that's the big concern. They've got to get his mindset right because they need to keep him. Yes, last week he was 7 for 7, 108 yards in terms of receiving, which is his best performance of the season by far. So he's still doing the job. He certainly clicked for the last couple of weeks, but the week before, 3 receptions.
And that would kind of just make Kirk Cousins' 3-year, $84 million contract look like somewhat of an albatross. If you trade away your best receiver, and then you got Cousins for essentially another season and a half, he hasn't performed for you. They haven't lived up to expectations. I feel like it would just be a terrible move to trade him, especially you don't even know what you're going to get at this point. The draft's over. You're just going to be trading for future picks, and you hope they pan out in the draft. I would, try, like you said, get his mind right, because if they don't, it's going to be an ugly season in Minnesota. It's a surprise they're 2-2 right now. They have a minus 21 point differential thus far.
Yeah.
He hasn't requested a trade at this point in time, so the Vikings really wouldn't get to a point. They're not in a position where they have to get rid of him, so they're just not going to get the offers that they're willing to accept at this point in time.
Well, nobody ever gets the offers, Anthony and Lewis, what you're going to get during the regular season. It all comes after the regular season. So
exactly.
Absolutely.
At some point, they got to figure it out, and they got to figure it out Because remember one thing, guys, okay? Your margin of error is you lose 6 or 7, you're borderline to get into playoffs, and they're already 2-2. You know what I mean? So that's pretty much the way I look at it. So, all right, so obviously he signed a 5-year extension, and we've all talked about the fact that they don't plan to trade him. So, what else do you want to say about the Diggs thing before we move on to the Jaguars?
I know that at this point in time it's still questionable as far as social media is concerned whether or not he's going to play this weekend, but I've met him before. He is a professional. He's very focused for the most part, so I would be very, very surprised if he did not play this weekend, given that he did practice today regardless of all of this, and he hasn't actually requested a formal trade yet, so I still expect him to play against the Giants.
Well, and yet ironically in back-to-back weeks, okay, we have Jalen Ramsey, who didn't play last week, and his 131-game consecutive streak went down by the wayside. And now all of a sudden we've got Stephon Diggs talking about this. I understand that it would be hard to collect money from these guys because they're on the sidelines in uniform. But if you start taking money out of their pocket, I think they might rethink their position, as anybody would. But it's hard to take any money out of them since, their grievances and the fact that they're on the sidelines and with the team. I think. So, all right, well, with that said, let's segue over to the Jaguars not planning to trade Jalen Ramsey, according to owner Shad Khan. So, go ahead, Anthony, continue on.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say it's nice to hear an owner come out publicly and speak so openly about this. It's nice to actually have that because there are too many teams that are closed off. But yeah, so Shad Khan has said the best thing is to have him be a part of the team, obviously referring to Jalen Ramsey. He said, obviously, football is a team sport, and I'm sensitive to what individual insights or viewpoint or requests there might be. He also said that, but we have to do the right thing for the team. We have the values. Jalen adds to us, the Jaguars. I think we value him highly. We're still looking at what's the right thing for the Jaguars, and I think the best thing is to have him be a part of the team. He has said his relationship with Ramsey is good, and at this point in time, he wants him to be a part of the team. It's as simple as that, and it's a strange situation because, again, I certainly can't see. Khan obviously doesn't want him to go, and it's certainly safe to say Coughlin doesn't necessarily want him to go either. He's the kind of guy who will not get pushed around by anybody. So if he doesn't want him to go, he simply won't trade him. It's as simple as that. And I think Ramsey at this point in time is fighting somewhat of a lost battle, if I'm being perfectly honest. I do not see him leaving the team anytime soon, so he may as well just head down, grind way through the rest of the season, and then see what happens next off season. Yeah,
exactly. And it sounds like to me there's only one word that describes Shad Khan. He's trying to be the buffer and the peacemaker. So
certainly, with Coughlin at the head, you definitely have to have a peacemaker. Let's be honest, he's not afraid to miss his words at all.
Well, not only that, he's a guy writing the paycheck. So let's not forget that Tom Coughlin gets his check signed by Shad Khan, David Caldwell, Doug Marrone, and all the 9 million other employees that are with the Jaguars. So I think it's just another one of those situations where Mr. Ramsey needs to get his head straight like Mr. Diggs. And we're seeing too many guys in recent weeks that need to get their heads straight, and this is not the time to do it as you're playing these games, trying to march toward the postseason. Because let's not kid ourselves. The one thing that can't get lost in all of this is that basically you may sign a three-year contract, 5-year, but everybody's essentially a 1-year deal.
Look at Odell Beckham when he signed that extension with the Giants for $95 million.
Right.
Exactly.
He wanted out immediately.
Well, but you know what? Everybody's on a 1-year deal. Don't worry about the what appears to be the contract when you look at it. It's a guaranteed money. So let's stick to something which is a bit more positive since we've done a great job on the negatives. And that thing called Minshew Mania.
Loving this guy, man.
Oh, let's be honest. They've really taken this and run with it. They've seen what social media is doing with regards to Gardner Minshew, their QB, and they have gone with it. And fair play on them. Yes, so they're offering a Minshew Mania mini pack. The Jaguars are. It's so lowest ticket prices for the Jets and the Saints games are coming in these packs. Include the essentials of a bandana and a fake moustache, because of course if you want to look like Gardner Minshew, that's what you need that enigmatic moustache. It's somewhat ridiculous, but at the same time it's nice to have a slightly light-hearted story thrown in with all this negativity lately, so it's nice to see that they're running along with this little fan here.
Well, let me tell you, first of all, I don't worry about traffic jams when I go to Jaguars games, because you know what, guys, I get there 4 hours earlier and I happen to have 10 to 12 hour days. I don't care what happens in the parking lots. I just sit up in the press box, fire up my Wi-Fi, and do my pregame preparation as Lewis